Okay, what's going on, everybody? My name is Mang, and I'm here today to talk about a different role-playing system called Fate. And Fate is kind of a relatively new system in the grand scheme of things, I suppose. Fate originally came out in 2003 and has gone through several editions throughout the years. The first two editions were generic, which means that you can use them with any type of setting. And there's a few different generic systems, GURPS being the big one. I think Savage World is another. There's a few. And so if you were doing a fantasy game, traditional D&D type, if you were doing science fiction, if you're doing Wild West, if you were doing cosmic horror, if you were doing any of these, you could use this system for any of them. So it's not restricted like something like D&D is. And then the third edition of Fate was, I think, more just adapted to a few different specific settings. I think Spirit of the Century was one of them. Dresden Files was another. And there were a few others. And so it wasn't really a generic edition. And those RPGs were well received for what they were, but it was not a generic edition. So then recently, about a year ago or something like that, they did a Kickstarter for a 4th edition called Fate Core. And this they were taking back to its roots now, so it was going to go back to being an open generic system with plenty of adaptability and all that stuff. And so the Kickstarter, I think they asked for about $3 grand, and they raised $430,000, something like that. So it was quite a big deal. And I had never really heard of Fate until that Kickstarter. I wasn't crazy. I'm not crazy huge into the RPG world, so I guess if you visit a game store every week or something, you hear about all this stuff. But I had heard about the Kickstarter, and I was like, oh, okay, Fate, and I was like, it's getting notice. Maybe it's cool. I don't know. I did not donate to the Kickstarter. Mert did, but I did not. And so then after that, it just kind of left my memory and whatever. Until recently, I'm not sure what I was looking for. I was looking around RPG stuff, and I heard some guys talking about Fate Core, and I was like, now I'm starting to get kind of interested in more systems and stuff, see what's out there. Back in the day, it was just, okay, there's D&D. That's what there is. And then, okay, there's Pathfinder, and then, oh, okay, there's this Numenera thing coming out, and oh, there's Shadowrun, and there's Call of Cthulhu, and these are all kind of cool. It doesn't have to be just D&D. So now I'm a bit more interested than I used to be. So I was like, maybe I should check out this Fate thing. And so I looked it up, and yeah, there's Fate Core. It's released, and it's free, basically. It's pay what you want, which includes the price of $0. So anybody can go on there and download Fate Core. I'll include a link in the description if you want to check it out. And I recommend it if you're interested in a generic system. But if you just want the kind of the overview, I'm going to talk about the big aspects of it. That was somewhat of a pun. Okay, so Fate Core. There's basically two versions of the 4th edition of Fate. There's Fate Core, and then there's Fate Accelerated Edition, which is FAE. And the Accelerated Edition, I really have little interest in. It's a very stripped-down, slim version of Fate that you can just pick up and go within, minutes. I don't have... I'm sure it appeals to plenty of people, but it is a bit too stripped down for my taste, as it is. Fate Core is definitely is definitely more what I'm looking at, so that's what I'll be talking about. Alright, so it's a generic system. And I was interested in how that worked, you know, because I had never looked into a generic system before. So how do you do that where it can adapt to any setting? And basically you make it pretty light, you know, whereas something like Dungeons and Dragons, you could buy a book of that and it'll just have, you know, all the attacks you can do, all the spells, you know, loot, monsters, it'll have all of that. A generic system basically just gives you, like, blueprints. It's like, you know, something like StarCraft, where it has like a map builder or something like that, you know, where it just gives you kind of the tools to make what you want. So the main part, the big part of Fate is Fate points. And Fate points, every player gets these. And how they work is you can use Fate points to add a bonus to a dice roll, re-roll a dice roll, add like a story detail. So this, I mean, it depends on the situation, but if you were like, if you wanted something like an object there that the DM didn't put there, he might let you spend a fate point so it was there now. You know, whatever it might be, you know, a bookshelf or whatever, you know, it can be much different. I'm just giving a shitty example, but you understand what I'm saying. You can add a detail to the world, to the story, to the situation, whatever. And how you get fate points is everybody has what they call a refresh. And so at the beginning of every session, you reset to a certain number of fate points. And the default is 3. And later on, I'll talk about how that number might change depending on how you build your character. But the default number is 3. So you start a session, you get 3 fate points, we'll say. And so you start playing, blah, 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 and you get into a situation pretty quick where you roll the dice, and I'll talk about the dice real quick. They're fudge dice, which I'd never heard of before. They're special D6s that have 2 of the sides have a minus, 2 of the sides are blank, and 2 of the sides have a plus sign. And so you roll 4 of these every time, no matter what. You roll 4 of these fudge dice. And so you count up the negatives, you count up the positives, and you basically ignore the neutrals, and you check your result. So the best result is 4 positive, worst result is 4 negatives. And so most of the time you're probably going to end up around neutral, -1, +1, but you know, it's not as wide ranging as a D20 can be. It's not as swingy, I guess. And so I have not played this system. I guess I should mention that I have not played Fate Core yet. I'm planning on it soon, but I have not played it. So I'm curious as to how the dice work, you know, in practice. I'm definitely interested to see how not swingy it is, or swingy. I don't know. I'm curious. So anyways, alright, so you get into a situation and you gotta roll the dice. So say you roll and it's alright, maybe you get like +1 overall. You're not crazy about it. You know, you add your skill, which we'll talk about later, so maybe you're at like a +2 overall. And you're like, okay, it's alright, but it could be better. And so you want to spend a fate point to boost this. Now you can't just spend the fate point. You can't just throw it in the thing. It's a bit more involved than that, and I'll get to that in a second. But in the end, you spend the fate point, and it adds +2 to the roll, so it would jump from a 2 to a 4. Or you could re-roll entirely to try to get more than just, you know, the +1 you originally did. They advise overall, unless you get like -3 or 4, to just take the +2. But you know, you can re-roll all the dice if you want. And so then the fate point would go to the DM, and you'd have the overall of the +4, and you would hope that you know, succeeds. Okay. I can't talk about fate points. I can't talk about it anymore without going back to the other big part of it, which is aspects. Aspects basically are completely integrated in the entire system. They permeate everything. And it's probably my favorite part of Fate, is these aspects. Okay, so an aspect is basically like a descriptor. And it can be applied to just about anything. It can be applied to a character, to an NPC, to an object, to a weapon, to an animal, to the surroundings, to nature, to the situation, to the story, to the world, to anything. You know, an aspect can be applied to anything. So for a character, all right, when you're building your character, this is going to be kind of all over the place, I know, but I'll try to bring it all together. Okay, so when you're building your character, the first thing you do is really, you come up with what they call a high concept. And this is an aspect that basically best defines who your character is in one little sentence, one aspect. So for somebody like Artemis, as an example, his high concept would perhaps be boy genius. And you want your aspects to basically kind of be double-edged, in the sense that you want them to be a positive thing, but you also want them to potentially be a negative thing as well. So for the boy genius part, genius obviously is most of the time going to be used in a positive sense. The boy part can potentially be used in a negative sense. And I'll explain why you want it in a negative sense in a bit. So, boy genius would work. For Ovum, his high concept might be loyal servant of Artemis. For Frederick Zahler, it might be charismatic vampire or something like that. You know, it's not incredibly complicated. You can make it complicated if you want. It can be as narrow or as broad as you want. But you want probably you want to lean more towards the narrow, because aspects are, for a character, are incredibly useful for role-playing. It's really awesome for that, because you'll have your list of aspects for a character, and you'll be in a situation, and you'll be like, you know, how would this character react in this situation? What would he do? And you look at your aspects, and they easily define it. And there's more to it, but I don't want to go into it yet, so I'll just keep going. But okay, so you do your high concept, big single descriptor line. Then you move on to trouble. And this is mostly going to be negative. This is your character's main problem in life, I guess, at the moment. And this can be kind of an inward trouble or an outward trouble. So it could be kind of a personality thing. Like, Artemis's could be, his original incarnation could be wanted criminal or something like that. Or his later version could be, you know, enemy of Nihilus, or, you know, something like that. Something that's like, okay, this is his problem, and this is useful for the player as well as the DM. So he can go down the line. He's got a list of everybody's trouble. Be like, okay, so this character has this. You know, how can I work this into an adventure? And so it helps everybody. Then you list a few more aspects, and these can be pretty much whatever you want, I think. Fate. The book describes this scenario in which you kind of do like a team building scenario, and so you all go over each other's aspects, and you all come up with this story, and you know, you work off of it. I'm sure people do that. I don't predict any groups that I play in doing that. I think it would more be individual, but there is definitely a team mentality about Fate Core. where you're all trying to build this world and contribute to this story, which I think is cool. I just don't see it happening. But the other aspects can be whatever you want. So for Ovum, he could write down sworn enemy of orc kind. He could put illiterate. Artemis could put desperately looking for his father. It could be anything. Anything that you want to be a part of your character. Alright? And so you have these aspects, and the reason that you want them to be, I don't want to say good, but accurate, role-playable aspects, is because when you are in a situation and one of these aspects is relevant, so say Ovum is in a fight with an orc, you know, his aspect of sworn enemy of orc kind is very relevant to that situation. He can then spend that fate point to invoke it. So you can only invoke an aspect and spend a fate point if it's relevant. So if he's fighting an elf, he cannot invoke sworn enemy of orc kind. It doesn't make sense. And so you want to be able to invoke your aspects a lot, because you get bonuses to your rolls, or you get rerolls or stuff like that. You know, or you get to add story detail. You can't just, maybe you can, I'm a little unclear on the rules for adding a story detail, if it has to be relevant to an aspect. Because their example in the book, it was relevant, but then they also talk about how you could just make up story details and spend the fate points. So I guess it could be both. But yeah, so if Artemis is in a social situation and he's trying to get info about where his father might be, he might be able to invoke that aspect to get a boost to like a social roll, to help that, you know. So like I said, when you're in a situation, combat, non-combat, whatever, and you're trying to think about how your character would play this out, you can look at these aspects, and you can look at them from a role-playing perspective, but you can also look at them from, how can I use these to help me, you know? How can I use these to invoke them so I can have a greater chance of succeeding in what I'm trying to do? And so I think it's really cool for that. Now, the other part of it, the economy. You're gonna be spending fate points quite a bit because it's helpful. You know, you get boost to rolls, you get to add details, you can do all stuff like that. So you're gonna be spending fate points. How do you get them back? Aha. Well, that's where the negative part of the aspects come in. That is where the vampire part, the boy part, the illiterate part, you know. These are called compels. And this is, it's basically the exact opposite. It's either the DM or you or another player looking at the aspects and being like, okay, how can we use this aspect of this character or whatever to screw you over or screw the group over, you know? So Ovum goes up to, he gets a letter or something, you know. I guess that's kind of a bad example because it seems too obvious. So I guess he doesn't get a letter. He's trying to read a notice. And it's like, well, you being illiterate, you know, complicates this scenario. So have a fate point. Or Artemis goes into, you know, an important discussion, an important meeting or something with some powerful people, and being like, yeah, so they're going to just basically disrespect you completely because you're a boy. Have a fate point. And so if you accept the compel, whatever it might be, you know. I'm giving bad examples because I've never played. You can see where it goes, though. Ovum having a business contact or something, like some important contact, and it happens to be an orc, the DM would give a fate point because that complicates it. You know, it's important to the story, but it's like, yeah, this is going to be bad. You know, it's not going to be a good thing. Of course, Odin would kill him immediately, but, you know, again, complications. So, okay, so you accept the compel based on the aspect, you get a fate point. You can refuse. You can refuse the compel, but you have to give up a fate point. So you're basically losing 2 of them. So you want aspects that have the negative edge to it because you want to be compelled. Because you want fate points. You know, I guess you could not spend fate points, so you don't have to worry about getting fate points, but why are you playing Fate? You know, the whole point is it's fun to go back and forth. You know, you can do these great, awesome, heroic things, but then also shit can go really bad, and it's fun because you have to fix the mess, and so it's a back and forth, and it's all fueled by these fate points. So, okay, aspects can also then be applied to, like I said, anything. So, a ladder, you know, you could just have a ladder, or it could be suddenly a rotting ladder, and then that would be the aspect rotting, you know. Or you could have a pile of leaves, or a barn, and then, say you slap the on fire aspect onto it, then boom. So then, you know, it's like a thing that anybody can just feed off of, you know? You can look at the aspect, like, you know, you get like, almost like this HUD view up around you as you look around and you see all the aspects that are all around you. Like, how do I utilize these, you know? If I swing off the chandelier and I gain the aspect swinging on chandelier, I can then invoke that aspect and plunge down on this enemy and get bonus to the roll, you know? And so, combat-wise, it's not just... It's very different from something like 4th edition, where it's very just clinical. And it's just, okay, I use, you know, Mind Blast, and then I will use Cleave, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, you really get involved, then, in the situation, and you're looking at everything, and like, how can I achieve this in the coolest way, you know? You know, or you set somebody on fire, and then there I have the on fire aspect, or you cover them in water, so they have like the drenched aspect, and then if you somehow electrocute them, you're like, I'm gonna invoke that wet aspect, perhaps for free, you know, not even spending a fate point, and they'll take, you know, perhaps bonus damage then, because they have this aspect. And so it's basically just, you know, a way of describing, a descriptor, but the way it's part of the system is very interesting to me. So aspects can be permanent, or they can be temporary. They can last, you know, your whole character's lifetime, or they can last 3 seconds, you know. And so, it's just a jumble of things going on, and keeping track of it, and trying to utilize it to its best effort. Okay, so yeah, aspects, fate points, big part of it. Then there are the skills, the skill system. And this is everything here is highly hackable. So you can change all this if you want. I'm just going to be describing the base system as it is. So for skills, how it works out of the box is when you make a character, and again, you can alter this. If you want a really low-powered campaign, you can dial it down. If you want a high-powered, like superheroes, you can dial it up. But basic, you get 1 skill at +4. So whenever you do something related to this skill, you get +4 to the roll, which is pretty big. And then you get 2 skills at +3, 3 skills at +2, and 4 skills at +1. Everything else is at 0. And so, like, they balance that around how many skills there are. So you could change it so you have 1 skill at +5, 2 at 4, blah, blah, blah. But then pretty much every character is going to be slightly adept, at least, at every skill, for the most part. So you can add as many skills as you want. You could add 50 skills, but then, you know, you have to do a lot of changing around. It's, like I said, it's a hackable system if you want to do it. So the skills that they give out of the box are pretty applicable to anything. You've got physique, will, notice, fight, athletics, deceive, provoke, rapport, resources, you know, things that you could imagine in just about any setting. And so it's just like, okay, we have a game that involves... I'm trying to think of something now that it would be an exception to those skills. As my mind blanks. The psychic. You know, you have a system where a lot of people are psychics or something like that. You might have a telepathy skill or something like that. And just that example of being a psychic, you know, you could incorporate that in many different ways. You know, you could incorporate that as just an aspect. You can incorporate it as a skill. You can incorporate it as a stunt. You can incorporate it as an extra, you know. So how you want to handle it is based on how you want it to be in your system, how prevalent you want it to be, how powerful you want it to be, blah, blah, blah. So like I said, it's very flexible. Skills by themselves, pretty basic. Anything you want to be a skill, you can just slap it in there. And you can put points into it. It adds to the roll. It's pretty simple. All right, stunts. Stunts are basically what make your character unique, what make your character cool as far as the skills go, generally. So, the example they give is for something like fight. So you might have two characters that have fight at +4. They're both clearly capable. But they might have two different stunts then related to fight. So one character might have a stunt for fight that gets them a bonus to rolls if they spend the time to analyze their opponent. You know, they take a much more methodical route to combat. So, you know, if they're sitting there and they're kind of dodging and weaving and jabbing to kind of just see how it works, they might get a bonus to that. Where another character might get a bonus to fight if they initiate the first attack of the conflict, you know. So this character is much more tactical, you know, much more methodical. This character is much more in your face and smashing you in. Both of them are good at fighting, but in completely different ways, you know. That's kind of what stunts do then. They differentiate characters through their skills. And stunts can be pretty much anything you want. They can modify just about anything. You know, for burglary, you can get skills or stunts that enhance your ability to pickpocket in a tight situation. You might have a stunt that says, spend a fate point, and no matter where you are, you have a lockpick. So even if you're naked in prison, you spend a fate point, I have a lockpick, you know? You might have a stunt for notice that says you can, like, examine a room for a given amount of time and logically piece it back together from, like, a day ago as to how it probably looked, you know. Or you can look at an object and see the route that it might have taken to get to where it is now. That might be a stunt that differentiates you from another character that's good at... So that's like a detective compared to, like, a ranger, you know. And so stunts can be whatever you want, and they can cost whatever you want. So some stunts are just free, you know, whatever. They're just tacked onto the skill. Some might cost you a fate point to invoke. That's kind of a common thing. Some might cost you... some might be linked to an aspect, a specific aspect, so it has to be kind of relevant to a certain situation. I think all of them, though, cost refresh. Pretty sure. So every character, I believe, I may have to check this, but I believe every character gets a standard refresh of 3, which means they start every session with 3 fate points, and they get 3 stunts to start with. So they give a list of default stunts, and I think the Fate Wiki or something like that has a huge list of stunts you can grab, but you can also come up with anything you want. So you get 3 of them when you make your character. Now, you can reduce your refresh rate by 1 to grab an extra stunt. So refresh rate of 2, 4 stunts, refresh rate of 1, 5 stunts. This is just the base settings. Now, if you as a DM, you want your players to have just a bunch of stunts. You want them to be doing crazy stuff, have a very kind of pulpy game, just craziness going on. You might say that you can have up to 5 stunts for free, you know, instead of a refresh rate of 3. Or you might say 1 refresh rate gets you 2 extra stunts or something like that, you know. Or you can say you start with 1 stunt, you know, and you have to buy them from there. So you can dial it in however you want. Okay, and then there's extras. Extras are basically anything that is not an aspect, skill, or stunt. So you might have like a plasma rifle. Alright? Say you're in a sci-fi thing and you have a plasma rifle. Now, depending on how the DM wants to do it, that might be one of your aspects. So you have the aspect wields plasma rifle. And so whenever you roll your shoot, you can invoke your thing to add to the roll because you're shooting a plasma rifle or something like that. Or you can just, if you really want guns all over the place, you want them very prevalent, just everywhere, you can just say, make it an extra, you know. You have a plasma rifle, you have a laser pistol, you have, you know, a molecular desponder or something like that. I don't know. You can just pretty much throw anything you want into extras. It's just kind of it's just an extra category. Magic. For magic, you might have an aspect that just says, you know, controls earth magic. And so it's kind of vague in that aspect, you know. So you might say you might want to, you know, it's not clearly defined where you just want to do something with the earth. You want to make a quick barrier, okay? And so you might do a roll based on a skill, perhaps lore or something like that, or a special magic skill that you come up with. And so you do that, and you wouldn't be able to even make that roll if you didn't have that aspect. You know, that has to be a part of your character. And maybe you can invoke that if you want to get a bonus. Or you can just make it an extra. If you want a lot of people to have magic, you don't want it to be special, you don't want it to be just an aspect. It can just be, okay, you have this kind of magic. If you want to clearly define like a list of spells, that would go in the extras section. Like I said, it's basically just a box where you can throw in everything else you want. Okay. So, let's see, what else is there? Alright, there's the actions that you can take in a situation. There's 4 different actions. There's overcome, and this is basically where you are trying to overcome a obstacle. Alright? So say you're trying to climb up a cliffside. You'd be rolling your athletics, perhaps, to overcome the passive opposition of the cliffside. So, pretty basic, you know. Now, the opposition can be passive, such as, you know, just a part of this situation, part of the scenery, whatever it might be, or a trap or whatever, you know, something non-living. Or it can be active, which is something actively resisting your progress. Generally, you know, like an NPC or a monster or something like that. And so if it's passive, you just roll up against just a number assigned to it. So the DM might say, okay, you're trying to climb this cliffside, it's pretty difficult, you're going to have to beat +3, or +4, or +5, whatever. And so you have to roll, and you do the roll, you add your whatever skill, and then if you have an aspect that's relevant, you know, if you have the mountain climber aspect, you might want to invoke it in that situation. And you can choose to invoke an aspect after you've rolled. So if you pass it, no problem. Like, all right, whatever, I don't need to. But if you're like, it's rough, you're going to invoke that, spend the fate point, get the bonus. And then there's active opposition, which you have to roll against them. So against the DM, basically. And whoever wins, wins. Alright, and then there's... there's 4 different modes of failure or success. I know, it sounds more complicated than it really is. Okay, so you can either fail, which is pretty simple. You don't roll high enough. Which means you either don't do what you're trying to do, or you succeed at a major cost. And so, going back to the climbing the cliff, say you don't roll well enough, and even invoking an aspect would not, or you re-rolled and it just didn't work, you failed. You could fail and fall, which would be not doing what you want, or you could succeed at a major cost. So, this is something a DM generally has to come up with on the fly. And so for that, you might say, all right, I want to get up there. All right, you get up the side of the cliff, but you dashed your leg against a sharp rock or something like that, and now you have the bleeding gash aspect or something like that, or you suffer a mild consequence, whatever it might be. That's what it would be. So it's a major cost. So it's something bad, but it doesn't stop you from accomplishing what you wanted to accomplish. And that, I think, basically stemmed from a common problem in something like D&D, where it's like, okay, they need to follow these tracks to this orc camp, or my adventure can't continue. The ranger critically failed. Shit. Nobody else can track. Damn it. Adventure's over, It's kind of there to prevent stuff like that. It's like, okay, you'll still be able to do what you want to do, but I'm going to make your lives worse in the process. I like it. Because getting held up like that just because of bad rolls or something is not pleasant. So, okay. The D&D example could also be seen as bad DMing. You should never have a situation like that, but sometimes it arises. Okay, so you can fail or succeed with a major cost. You can tie. So if you roll a +2 against a passive +2, or the other person rolls a +2, you succeed at a minor cost. So for the cliff climbing thing, you tie the roll, so you might climb up there, but maybe you drop something on your way up. Maybe you drop some coins or a weapon or something like that. So it doesn't really... It's not a major thing. It doesn't really hurt you, but it's like, damn, So that it's a minor cost. It's better than failing. All right? You can succeed, which is, you succeed. You did what you wanted to do, no doubt about it. Or you can succeed with a major, or succeed with style, is what they call it. This is when you beat the number by, I think, 3 or more. It might be 2 or more. I want to say 3 or more. One of the two. You succeed by a bunch. So say it's +3 for the to climb the cliff, or +4 or something, and you roll a 5. And you're like, okay, that's a success. But I'm going to invoke this thing so I can really succeed. You probably wouldn't do this in the cliff climbing situation, but there are situations where you really want to succeed with style. Okay, so you just dominate it. It's basically like a critical success. And how that works is, it depends on what you're trying to do. But you either get like a boost, which means you get basically a one-time use aspect. Alright? So in combat, if you succeed with style on a defense roll or something. So this orc comes swinging at you, you roll your defense and you just obliterate the roll. You dominate. You might get a boost where you might call it like Spectacular Flourish or something like that. Okay, so then because he's just like, whoa, on your next attack roll, you might be able to invoke that temporary boost for free. You don't have to spend anything, so you would probably want to do it, and you get a +2 to the roll, or something like that. You know, it's just a one-time aspect because you were so cool, you know? I like that. It's just like, yeah, you feel like a badass, you know, like, because you succeed with style. So, you either get a boost, or we'll move on to the next category of actions, which is called Create an Advantage. Create an Advantage is where you're basically doing anything to give yourself, I want to say a boost, but that's not the right terminology. To create an advantage for yourself. So say you're in combat and you throw sand in the guy's eyes. That's not an attack. All right, you're not hurting him. You're creating an advantage for somebody else to, you know, kick his shit in, or yourself to kick his shit in, whatever it is. You know, you're creating a new situational aspect that you can exploit. So the sand in the eyes is a good example. So you roll the Create Advantage. So for the sand in the eyes, I think that would be fight. I'm pretty sure. It's up to the DM. It could be fight. It could be athletics. I don't know. It'd probably be fight. So you roll your fight. They get to defend against it. If you fail, you can succeed with a major cost. So, well, you can fail, so you can just like, oh shit, I threw it over there. You can succeed with a major cost, which in this situation might be, you know, he gets sand in his eyes, but he doesn't really, you know, he's just going to swing at you right now. So he's just, you know, he's pissed off at you, so he gets a free hit on you, or something like that. So he's still going to have sand in his eyes for somebody else to swoop in and smack him, but, you know, you have to weigh if it's worth it in the situation. You can tie, so you succeed with a minor cost. So maybe you throw the sand in his eyes, but then you get the aspect off balance. Or maybe you fall to the ground as you're doing it, so you get the prone aspect, or something like that. Again, I haven't ran this, so this might not all be completely accurate, but it's working as I'm talking, so okay. You can succeed normally, so okay, he's got sand in his eyes, and that creates a situational aspect then on that character, sand in eyes. And anybody that's going to attack this guy then, after that happens, gets one free invoke on that aspect. So you throw sand in the eyes, then it's, you know, Mert's turn or whatever. He's going to swing at the guy. He rolls. He gets +4. He's like, I'm going to invoke that for free. So then he gets +6. That's big, you know, because you can stack multiple invokes, or, you know, multiple aspects on somebody. They can be disoriented, sand in their eyes, dizzy, and then somebody can come in and invoke all 3 of those and hit the dude for like 12 or something like that, you know, +12, and just boom, you know. And so that's kind of a strategy, is to build up these disadvantages on somebody. So yeah, you get, if you succeed normally, you get the 1 free. If you succeed with style, you get 2 free invokes. Now, one person attacking can't stack both of those. They can't invoke it twice. But it's basically, you know, he's gonna have sand in his eyes for 2 different attacks coming at him. So succeeding with style is always better. Okay, so that's creating an advantage. I gave a combat example, but you can do that with anything. Like when you want to break into a place, you're trying to burglarize a house, you can case the joint. You can go all around it and you can check, you know, where all the security is, the locks or something like that, and you can roll your burglary to create an advantage for when you eventually do break into the place. So you can be like, oh yeah, I know how the security works here, so I'm gonna, I didn't do this roll as well as I wanted to, crack open this window or something like that. I didn't do it as quietly or whatever, so I'm gonna invoke that free advantage. So yeah, you can do out of combat, in combat, create an advantage is basically whatever you can to give yourself a little extra help. There's attacks, which are pretty self-explanatory for the most part. Obviously, combat, you understand how attack works. Out of combat, I think like if you had burglary and you were trying to pickpocket somebody, I think that would be an attack move. It's not that complicated of a section. Defend is the counterpart to attack. So if you were pickpocketing somebody, you would probably roll your attack with burglary. They would roll their defense with notice or something like that. So yeah, it's pretty simple there. Okay, so then there is how health works. There's, out of the box, there's two sets. There's physical stress and there's mental stress. So you get cut in combat. That's physical stress, all right? So say you do the rolls, you fail your defense roll, you don't do great. So they roll +4 on their attack, you roll +1 on your defense, all right? That's a 3 difference. So the physical stress track it's basically like boxes. So there's a +1 box, or there's a 1 box, there's a 2 box, and then depending on your physique score, there might be a 3 box or even a 4 box. Alright, so say this is Ovum, and he's got a good physique, he gets hit for 3. It's because that's the difference between the rolls. So they call it shift of 3. So he looks at his physical stress track, and he's got that 3 box, alright, and it's empty. So he can just check that off, and that's it. That absorbs all the attack. So basically you're like buying off the damage. If he didn't have that stress box, say he's just, Artemis or something like that, and he's got the 1 and the 2, he would have to check off both the 1 and the 2. Is that how it works? Maybe I'm wrong. Because there's house rules, too. I might be thinking of a house rule. So you could rule it that way. He checks off the 1 and the 2. But then there's also what they call consequences. Consequences are both physical and mental, so they can be either one. But consequences are basically, they're aspects. They are negative aspects. So say you get cut, and it's like 4 damage. It's a pretty big hit. The consequence boxes are 2, 4, and 6. Mild, moderate, and severe. So you get 4 damage. You don't have the stress boxes to take that up, so you have to take the consequence. So I think maybe you could take like a mild consequence of 2 and then check off the stress box of 2. That might be how it works. You can do this however you want, depending on how you want to run your game. So the consequence aspects are relevant to what happened to you. So you take a cut and you might have a gash across your chest aspect. If you get burned, you might have the ass on fire aspect. If you drank a poison, you might have the poisoned aspect. They could be whatever you want. And enemies can then invoke this aspect against you. So if you have like a broken arm as a consequence, they could attack your arm and invoke that consequence. They have their own fate points they get to spend. So they can invoke that to get a bonus to their roll. I think if you inflict a consequence on somebody, you get 1 free invoke to utilize that. So in combat, if you break somebody's arm, you get one free invoke to, you know, exploit that damage. Alright, so you got the stress boxes. For mental conflicts, that's stuff like if you're trying to like psych somebody out, like you're trying to like really rile somebody up, you might do like a mental conflict roll off. So you're provoke versus their will, and so if they have a really low will, you know, say they're easily, you know, high-tempered or something like that, and if they have the high-tempered aspect, maybe that's a compel. You know, you'd be like, yeah, you're gonna fail this, but I'll give you a fate point. You'd be like, oh, okay, because the player would be like, well, that probably makes sense. I probably would get pissed off, so sure, give me that. It's about the story. Okay, so say you really fail that, you can eat up the mental stress boxes, but if you have a low will, you probably only have 2, so if you get hit for 3, it's like, oh, well, you'll take a consequence. So you might take the riled up consequence, or the psyched out consequence, or the pissed off, or whatever it could be, you know? And then if combat ensues, they can then utilize that consequence that they made against you. So if you eat up all your stress boxes, and you eat up all your consequences, so you take a mild, a moderate, and a severe, you have to be really getting your ass kicked, you are taken out of the fight. So that's bad. You know, it's basically like falling unconscious in D&D and just being left to the enemy's devices. So this could mean you're dead. You know, depending on how your DM runs things, it could be you're dead. Or it could be you're captured or kidnapped, or you're left for dead, or, you know, could be whatever the enemies basically want. It's up to them. Now, if you don't want that to happen, but you know you're getting your ass handed to you, you can concede, which is different. This is where you basically volunteer yourself out of the fight in some way. And you get to kind of have some control over what happens to your character. So this could be, you basically don't forfeit all your life, you know. You don't take all the consequences. When you concede, you get a fate point. I think you get a fate point for conceding, and then you get another fate point for every consequence you took in the fight. So if you took a mild, a moderate, and you concede, you get 3 fate points right there, which is pretty cool. And you could concede by running away. You can concede by forfeiting to the opponent. You know, just, you know, whatever you think of is relevant to the situation. But it's different than being taken out, because then it's not really in your control. Okay, so I think I've gone over everything there. Yeah, I think I went through all the character stuff. So, yeah, it's a very interesting system to me because it emphasizes role-playing more than mechanics, I guess. You know, D&D is very crunchy. As in, you know, all the rules are laid out, you know, you look at them, and you're like, okay, the rules say I can do this, 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 you know, and you follow them. Fate is more like, okay, I want to do this, 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 this. What do the rules say about this, you know? It's kind of flipped. So it's a much more narrative game than I think D&D is. Now, you can have great epic stories come out of D&D. You definitely can. We have. But I think Fate much more encourages it. Partly because it's a generic system, so it's not always just high fantasy, which I'm definitely interested in that. But just how role-playing works is different, you know, especially 4th edition. 4th edition is very loose on the role-playing, you know, everything's combat. Fate Core, you know, with the aspects, with how combat works, with how, you know, ingenious it can be, I'm definitely intrigued by it, more so. So I'm kind of trying to convince Ziggy to maybe switch over our current D&D campaign to try out Fate. Because I made an Ovum character. It took me like 3 minutes. Because it's like, you know, I have an established character. It's like, okay, what are the aspects related to him? Okay, loyal servant of Artemis, signless, sworn enemy of orc kind, illiterate, religiously delusional, you know, it's okay, that sums him up. Quick-tempered, you know, no time for games, maybe, you know, whatever you want. And then you have the little skill pyramid. It's like, okay, his fight is at +4, his physique is at +3, his empathy is at 0, whatever. And then you come up with some cool stunts. So I modded, you know, he's an Avenger in D&D, so I gave him the Oath of Enmity stunt. So whenever he's in combat, he can spend a fate point and against a single opponent for the rest of the encounter, he gets +2 to his fight. So that's, you know, he has to spend a fate point, so it's a cost, and it's only against a single opponent. But it's representative of Ovum, you know, and it's unique to him. So that was just one stunt. I could come up with a couple others, but and for extras, I just wrote wields Orc Slayer, you know, and I didn't really go over any of this with Ziggy. So the Orc Slayer thing could be another aspect. So then, it doesn't really need to be, because if I'm fighting an orc and I'm going to invoke something, I have sworn enemy of orc kind, so you don't really need to overlap like that. Orc Slayer doesn't even need to be that special. It could be, but yeah, it could just be +1 against orcs constantly, so whatever. So yeah, I definitely want to try it out, because I'm a bigger fan of role-playing than I am mechanics, you know. 4th edition, yeah, I occasionally like it for the board game-ishness, you know. You set it all up, you got this epic combat, and you're tactical, and you're all around like this. But when you're not in combat, I feel like it could be so much more. You know, when I'm wheeling and dealing as Frederick Zahler, and I've got my finger all over the place, and, you know, I'm controlling everything like a puppeteer, and bluffing and lying my ass off, and, you know, the mechanics of 4th edition D&D don't help me too much, you know. So, I'd like to try it out at the very least. So, yeah. I'll put the link in the description for the actual rulebook. You can check it out. I think there's all sorts of settings, published settings that people are putting out there. And there's the Fate System Toolkit. So that goes into much more detail and gives you a lot more options and ideas and stuff like that for magic and superpowers and stuff like that. Because like I said, you can come up with pretty much any game you want with this. So yeah, that's Fate Core. My understanding of it at this point. I might have gotten a few things wrong and fudged a couple stuff, but that's a basic overview. So I hope you enjoyed listening to this video at the very least. If you are interested in role-playing games. If not, then I don't know why you're still listening to me. But anyways, if we do end up playing or switching or anything like that, I'm sure you will hear all my opinions on it. So, my name is Mang. This has been a overview of Fate Core, and I'll see you fine folks around.